10. Exactly a week after his prayers for wisdom and direction, Onochie drove into the estate in the Lugbe area where Ogadima lived. He had finally summoned the courage to call Mrs. Okoro after picking a number from Ogadima's file, which was still in his office. Though Mrs. Okoro was surprised when he introduced himself over the phone, she had, however, agreed to meet with him. She had given the appointment for that day, explaining that Ogadima would go for lectures and Onochie need not worry about meeting her at all. He hurriedly dropped off his children at the daycare and rushed over to see Ogadima's mother. His friends didn't mind having the children again, but he understood that it was wrong to abuse access and that there must always be boundaries in relationships. He knocked at the flat number Mrs. Okoro had given him and waited. The door slightly opened and Mrs. Okoro smiled when she saw him. "Mr. Nwachukwu," she said as she ushered him in. "Good afternoon, ma. Please come here, Onochie," he replied as he led the way into the sitting room as she directed. He did not know she was limping. She was seated the only time he had seen her at Ogadima's sister's wedding. Now he understood Ogadima's burning desire to ensure she was comfortable. "No, welcome. Please sit down," she said. She set a table with a bottle of water and a bottle of fruit juice and asked which he would prefer. "I am okay, ma," he replied with a smile. Mrs. Okoro looked at the tall, large-framed, dark-skinned man. "Well, too bad, because you have to take one. You do know that I prepared the table for you," she said in a voice that brooked no argument. Onochie, looking momentarily shocked, started to chuckle before eventually laughing out loudly. He tried to quickly school his features as he saw Mrs. Okoro looking lost. "I'm so sorry, ma, but he felt as if I just heard Ogadima's voice now. Now I know who she got her no-nonsense nature from," he said good-naturedly. Mrs. Okoro left the drinks at the table, sat gingerly on the edge of a chair, and it was her turn to stare at the young man. Onochie shifted uncomfortably under her piercing eyes. "I'm sorry if I was a bit forward, ma," he apologized. "You love Ogadima?" she asked, straight-faced. Onochie was shocked at her intuition and how she was quick to discern that. He slowly shook his head in affirmation. "Yes, I do," he replied quietly. "Hmm," Mrs. Okoro said, shaking her head sadly. "But you didn't tell her that, did you?" "I didn't, and I can't for now because I know she's clearly not ready to hear that," he replied with a hint of sadness in his voice. "Then why propose to her when you know her stand?" Onochie glanced at his hands briefly before looking up at Mrs. Okoro. "Because God asked me to marry Ogadima and love her the way a father would." Mrs. Okoro sat speechless, and Onochie would have been worried at her stillness but for the tears that rolled down her face. "Please, ma, don't cry," he whispered. "Mba," Mrs. Okoro said, using the edge of the sleeve of her blouse to wipe her eyes. "No, they are not tears of sadness, but of joy," she replied, waving a hand at him. "I am just a woman who prays simple prayers. I didn't go to school, but I believe in God. Amongst my children, Ogadima has always been the one I place before God the most, because she didn't take the absence of their father lightly at all. But God kept reassuring me that He is in control. Now, see what God has done. Hey, Chukudalu," she exclaimed as she looked upwards with outstretched arms in praise to God. "Yes, ma, God is intentional about His children, and He hears even the prayers from stammering lips once their heart is involved. He hears our faintest prayers and even our loudest cries for help," Onochie replied. "True," Mrs. Okoro said, shaking her head in confirmation. "You said your name is Onochie?" she asked. And Onochie nodded and said yes. "Onochie, Onochie," she replied slowly with nods. "Onochie. the one who has come to replace, she said, translating the meaning of his Igbo name. So God sent you to replace our absent father, Mrs. Okoro said, nodding her head severally in deep contemplation. Now, that's a confirmation that you are truly God's blessing for my Ogadinma. But how will you make her see that? Mrs. Okoro asked in grave concern. Truth be told, I don't know. That's why I propose a marriage of convenience. But she's totally against marriage, he replied sadly. Yes, she is. I know it will be a rough one, but I will speak with her, and let's also continue to pray. I believe you are a believer. Yes, I am a believer and an ordained pastor in my local assembly. Ha! Mrs. Okoro exclaimed, putting her hands on her chest. What happened, ma? What is it? He asked in shock. You a pastor? He nodded in confirmation. She sighed and then smiled. Well, our God is humorous. Everything Ogadinma saw against is what he has in store for her. Please don't even inform her that you're a pastor. I hope she doesn't know. No, we have never had cause to talk about that. Good. Then don't even talk about it. She has this strong dislike for pastors, Mrs. Okoro replied. But why? We have had some nasty experiences with the pastor of a church we once worshipped, and that has made my children, especially Ogadinma, paint all pastors with the same brush, she explained to him. Where are you from? Mrs. Okoro asked. Onochie was reluctant, but eventually mentioned his village in Anambra State. Hey, you are Osu? Mrs. Okoro exclaimed, moving backwards as if he had announced that he had leprosy. Do you believe in the Osu caste system too? He asked sadly. Mrs. Okoro felt ashamed of herself as the younger man said this. The Osu caste system is an ancient practice in Igbo land that discourages social interaction and marriage with the group of people referred to as Osu, outcasts. According to history, these Osu people were dedicated to the Aluse deities and as such been seen as inferior to the Nwadiala freeborns. This system has been traced back to a time when people were offered to the deities to clean the land from an abomination. Another view on the historical perspective of the Osu puts them as deviant people who simply refuse to heed the orders of the king or the decision of the community. As an Osu, you are kept in a state of permanent and irreversible disability, subjected to abuse and discrimination. The Osus are made to live separately from the freeborns and live close to shrines and marketplaces. They are not allowed to have any forms of relations with the Wadialas. They even may not break kola nuts at meetings or pour a libation or pray to God on behalf of a freeborn at any community gathering. An Osu cannot marry a freeborn. It is because of this that there are tons of investigation in Igbo land when marriages are to be contracted. Elders from both sides travel and conduct investigations to inquire about the social status of the family. Although in recent times, the Osu caste system has been criticized as it has been likened to slavery, and there have been calls from all quarters for its abolishment, though it's still being observed, especially when it comes to marriages. It's just beliefs that we were raised with, but to me, you are a human being and also a child of God. As long as Ogadinma is comfortable with it, then I have no issues. I just hope her father's family won't object, she added. Thank you, ma. I believe we will cross that bridge when we get there, he said. Mrs. Okoro nodded in agreement. I hope you will give me your permission to marry her. You have nothing to fear, as I promise to take good care of Ogadinma. That will be my greatest joy. Biko, take a drink, or should I make you something to eat? No, ma, I will just have some water. He quickly took the bottle and filled up the cup. So how are the twins? She asked. They are fine, ma. So you have heard of the twins? He asked with a huge proud grin. I have even met them. But asking if I have heard of the twins is like asking if I have met Ogadima, Mrs. Okoro said with a laugh. Daniel and Deborah, it's only if you have only just met Ogadima that you probably wouldn't have heard of the twins. She loves them as if they were her own, Mrs. Okoro said with a wishful smile. Apart from my mom and a family friend, it's only Ogadima that I can entrust the children with. And it's still baffling because I haven't known her that long. But when she's with the twins, there's this motherly love she exhibits. It's almost tangible, he said in reverence. Mrs. Okoro looked at the nice-looking young man, who was obviously enraptured with love for her daughter. She could only pray that God will help Ogadima to see this as God's hand and come to love and accept him. Their meeting was obviously orchestrated by God. Ha! If I live to be 1,000 years, I can never forget that day and the chance meeting, he added, shaking his head in amazement. They had a good time talking and knowing about each other, and by the time he was leaving, both had bonded to a reasonable extent. Onochie promised to keep calling and checking up on her from that day on. Mrs. Okoro allowed Ogadima to shower and eat dinner before informing her about Onochie's visit. What did he want? She asked in shock. He came to see me, her mother replied. Why? He came to ask for my permission to marry you, Mrs. Okoro said. Ogadima laughed sarcastically. And I hope you told him that I wasn't going to ever get married. And why? Her mother asked sharply. Because I can't give any man the power to hurt me, Mama. What does that even mean? Because I don't understand you. No, I didn't go to school. Her mother replied in obvious sarcasm. Mama, I can't be like you. If our father had done right by you, you won't be walking with a limp today or saddled with the burden of raising us all alone, she replied. And you probably won't be in Abuja or studying further so you can get a better job. Do you think God doesn't know about this and that he even allowed it to be so? Mrs. Okoro asked. Well, I know that God doesn't do evil. At least you told us that much as children, except you are now trying to tell me otherwise, Ogadima replied rudely. Mechonu, just keep short. God doesn't do evil, but he does allow us to go through some situations so that his divine purpose for our lives can be achieved. God allowed Joseph's brothers to sell him so that Joseph can save lives during the famine with the wisdom he gave him, Mama explained. Whatever, but I'm not getting married, she replied, waving a hand in dismissal. She picked her phone from the side table and stood up to leave the sitting room. If your father was half the man Mr. Nwachukwu is, I bet you wouldn't be saying this, her mother said. What's the meaning of that? Ogadima asked, stretching out her hands in confusion. It means you're a poor judge of character. If you will believe that a devoted and doting father like Mr. Nwachukwu will treat you badly, her mother replied. Ogadima stood still as what her mother said sank in. She was quiet for a moment. Yes, Mr. Nwachukwu is a devoted and caring father. But what is the guarantee that he will be a good husband? She asked. Because he is determined to not only be a good father, but also a good husband. Onochie is a good man, her mother added. Ogadima looked at her mother quizzically. You're already calling him Onochie? Yes, I like the name. It has a deep meaning for me. You know Onochie means the one who comes to replace. Well, he's most likely the man God wants to use to give you all that fatherly love you never had or knew. Mama, how did you even arrive at that conclusion? Ogadima exclaimed. Because the Spirit of God inside me made me understand it. Immediately he told me his name. Mama, I am going to bed, she replied in exasperation. Okay, but think about it now. If he's not a good man, he won't come to look for me and ask me to speak with you, her mother said gently. Ogadima waved a hand dismissively. That's not even on my agenda now, she said before finally leaving the room. Her mother also retired to bed, but unlike Ogadima, who slept off immediately she got to bed, her mother spent a good time praying and committing her daughter's heart to God. Mrs. Okoro discussed the matter with Zarachi after service the following day. But how do you intend to convince Dima? Zarachi asked as they sat under the shed of the talk shop in the church. Both of us are together in this. That's what I'm telling you, her mom replied. Mama, you know how stubborn Ogadima is, especially regarding the idea of marriage. I don't have that grace of talking her into agreeing, I beg, she replied. Wait now, you just need to let her know that marriage is good. Look at you. Some months ago, you were also saying the same thing. But today, you are happily married. Don't you want the same for your sister? Zarachi nodded in agreement. Marriage has been good to you. You are glowing. Her mother teased her. Zarachi chuckled. I'm glowing because I'm pregnant, Mama. Zarachi said, rubbing a slightly protruding stomach. Her mother smiled widely. But you are right, Mama. Marriage is a beautiful thing. For the first time in my adult life, I have someone apart from you that loves me, seeks to ensure that I'm comfortable and treats me right. It's what every woman should experience, she said with a smile. You see? Mrs. Okoro clapped happily. The way you are even talking now makes me feel like remarrying, her mother replied with a grin. Seriously, I prayed often for God to change Ogadima's heart, but I wasn't going to pressurize her if a man had not come seeking her hand in marriage. Now, I can't allow her to lose this wonderful man because of her stubbornness. And how do you know he's a wonderful man? You have only met him twice. Well, I have the Spirit of God, and he has never led me wrong. After all, someone once disliked Braha Mefuna, even when I was saying he's a good Christian brother, Mrs. Okoro teased. Ah, Mama, she said shyly as she playfully hit a palm on her forehead. Will you ever stop reminding me of that? She whispered in obvious embarrassment. No, I won't, she said jokingly, sipping some water. There was a companionable silence for a while. Would you like to remarry? Zarachi blurted out. Mama looked at her in utter shock. Remarry? How now? Mba, na grandma duties I dey now. Even if God has a better man for me, he should convert it to a younger man for Uzoma. Zarachi laughed as she exclaimed, Mama. Oh, her mom replied. Ha, Mama, I miss you a lot, she said, giving her mom a side hug. Name, I miss you too. Both of you, well done, oh. Ogadima, who had gone to see some church members she had given her resumes to, spoke up behind the duo. Be missing yourselves. You better take her with you to your house. Ogadima told her sister, who only laughed at her and said she was jealous. During the week, Mama had called Onochie to ask that they pray and fast for some days. Onochie readily accepted, and they agreed on the days for the spiritual exercise. Chapter 11. Ogadima was becoming frustrated with the job search. It's been 4 months, and she was here to get one. She still had to balance her tuition fees at the business school. Thank God for Zarachi, who had been giving her transport fare. But for how long? She thought as she sat tiredly on her bed. God, have you forgotten me? She asked in dejection. She wasn't one to be pitiful, but these days she found herself wallowing in self-pity a lot. How can someone with one of the best grades in school be roaming the streets without a job for 4 whole months? Whenever she needed jobs in the past, even as a student, it was almost as if the job were waiting for her to come for them. But now that she had graduated and should get a good paying job so she could relieve her elder sister and take care of her aging mother, the jobs were not forthcoming. Maybe you are searching in the wrong places, a thought dropped in her mind. Mr. Nwachukwu gave you a lifetime offer that others would give anything to get, and here you are searching for a job all over the place. The voice continued. But I don't want to get married, she said quietly. Just at this moment, she had this overwhelming feeling to read the story of Balaam. She knew the story because she had read it several times, but she had to search for the passage using the browser on her phone. It was in Numbers chapter 22. When she got to where Balaam's donkey refused to go further, the inner voice came again. Are you not like Balaam right now? You are searching for a job, and God has placed his angel on the way to stop you from getting the job your own way. No, God isn't like that, she exclaimed, trying to shut the inner voice and at the same time close the Bible app, but not before her gaze landed on verse 32 of the same chapter. I have come here to oppose you because your path is a reckless one before me. It was the angel that said this, and Balaam went ahead to say he would go back. Go back to Honors Electronics, she whispered with trepidation in the quiet room. Ha ha! She wasn't ready to do that, she thought. She quickly switched off the light in her room and lay on the bed, trying to shut out the thoughts in her head. Until Ngozi came to visit them some days later. Auntie Ngo, has none of your friends who you gave my resume to not gotten any jobs for me? Ogadinma asked pitifully. Nne, no. I keep giving them calls, but it's the same story of no job. Hey, sorry, my dear, her aunt said, rubbing a hand down one of Ogadinma's arms. I'm just tired. It's so frustrating, she whined. Why don't you get married now? Auntie Ngo blurted. Auntie Ngo, must marriage be the only solution you have for a girl child's problems? Same thing you did with Zarachi. And is Zarachi not happy today? See, if you see better man that will marry you, I bet get married. Ogadinma huffed. It's even good. Maybe you can talk to her. She has a proposal from a good man, but my daughter turned it down, Mrs. Okoro interjected. It's a lie, Auntie Ngo said in her exaggerated manner, clapping her hands as she turned to stare at Ogadinma. Auntie Ngo, you know I've always told you that marriage isn't for me. I can't deal with the likes of the Papa Zarachi of this world. Ogadinma replied in disgust. Hey, Omalecha, Asa, Tomato Juice, her mother praised her. The woman with the heart of a lion, Obi Kyonwanyi, my female warrior. You know both of us have a lot in common. Her hand cut in. Ogadinma, cocking her head, looked at her hand suspiciously. But the truth is that it's not everyone that is like Papa Zarachi. My uncle, who is your grandfather, that's your mother's father, had 5 daughters. 5, oh, she emphasized, displaying number 5 with her fingers. But your grandfather never despised them. Ask your mother. Prissy, she said, turning to her cousin Mrs. Okoro. Do you remember how uncle would make sure the 5 of you went with him to church every Sunday? He always walked so proudly with his 5 girls, despite jeers from some men in the village. Mrs. Okoro smiled in nostalgia. She nodded in agreement. Yes, Papa loved us, his girls. See, Olam, come, Auntie Ngozi said, pulling Ogadinma closer to her on the 3-seater. I will personally interview this man that has come to ask for your hand in marriage. You know I am a good judge of character. If I meet you today, I can tell if you are pretending or real, her aunt said. Ngozi, the man is even a former boss. The father of those twins Ogadinma is always taking care of, her mother quickly added. It's a lie, oh, her aunt exclaimed, clapping in a dramatic manner. She tucked both hands under her armpits in shock after the clap. What of his wife? Mba, Prissy, even me cannot approve of her becoming a second wife. Auntie Ngozi's facial expression suddenly turned sour as she expressed her displeasure. Auntie, his wife is late. She died in a car accident when the children were less than 2 years old, Ogadinma muttered. Ewo, Chineke mo, her aunt exclaimed as if the incident just happened. Ogadinma and her mother shared funny looks at Auntie Ngozi's thematic show and utterances. The man must be very lonely, oh, and taking care of those children all by himself all these years. Hey, he truly needs a woman in his life. Ha! That man is a very good man, oh, she added with all seriousness, nodding her head continuously in affirmation. Have you met him before? Mrs. Okoro asked in confusion. Just as Ogadima asked, how do you know that? How will I not know? Even though I haven't met him, any man that can remain unmarried for several years after his wife's death to care for such young children is an odogu, a great man indeed, she said, raising a fist to show Mr. Nwachukwu's greatness. Ogadima and her mother looked at her and both shook their heads at the never-ending dramas of her Ngozi. You should marry him, oh, my dear, you should, her aunt said assertively. Why? Ogadima asked. My dear, if you refuse to marry him, but allow him to marry someone else, do you know how that woman will treat those children? Moreover, you can be sure she won't allow you to have access to those twins again. After all, you are not related to their father or mother, her aunt said. These words hit Ogadima so hard that her lips trembled with the reality of what her aunt had said. She couldn't imagine her world without Daniel and Deborah. The thought of them alone always brings an indescribable joy to her heart and a ready smile to her mouth. When the man came to see me, he said she was the first person that he has seen who genuinely loved his children. Her mother's words penetrated through her lone thoughts. Auntie Ngozi hopped on her seat as she exclaimed, he came to see you? Yes, he did. See, I told you he's a good man, she said to Ogadima. How many young men these days bother to seek their potential in-laws to ask for their daughter's hand in marriage? He is not a young man, Tungo. He is in his early 40s. He is even way older than me, she wailed. My dear, that is good, her aunt said, clapping her hands joyously. Older men will take good care of their wives. You know he's more mature. You, Ogadima, that's the kind of husband that will fit you. No young man can tame that your coconut head, her aunt teased. Until I thought you said you were alike in character, Ogadima said in mock annoyance. Her mom and aunt laughed. Bekonu, my own no reach yours, abeg, her aunt said laughingly. Nne, both of us can't lead you the wrong way. That man that I saw that day will take good care of you. Not all men are like your father. At least, half amazing like your father. Your sister is happily married, her mother added. What if he doesn't? She muttered under her breath in confusion, her guard obviously weakened. Her aunt grabs her hand so suddenly that Ogadima was almost thrown off balance. You say, he dares not. He will not take care of you. He won't even try it. Auntie Ngozi said, Ogadima, you know it's fear that is speaking now. You know him even more than we do. And the truth is that you know with all that he has told you about the proposal that he intends to take good care of you and the children, Mama added. Ogadima sighed heavily. Her aunt pulled her into her arms as she called her name. Ogadima, everything will be all right, her aunt said as she translated the meaning of her name. Aren't you going to leave this apartment? Ogadima, who had come to visit Zarachi in her home, asked. Leave here? Why? Zarachi, looking around her kitchen, asked. You are sharing the same compound with your in-laws. Won't that lead to disrespect? Oh, that? I hardly see any of my in-laws, even though we stay in the same compound. My parents-in-laws hardly stay in Abuja, and Amaka is in the main building. So what's the issue? Do people not stay in the same compound with people they don't know or aren't even related to? Zarachi asked. True. But I just feel it's more respectable if you stay somewhere else. Dima, houses are very expensive in Abuja. I would rather stay here and save the money that we would have paid as rent. We can use that savings to build or buy a place of our own eventually, Zarachi added. There's so much wisdom in that, Ogadima agreed. They chit-chatted about several other things, a job search not left out. Do you think God may be hindering me from getting a job? Ogadima suddenly asked. Zarachi paused and looked intently at her younger sister. Why would you think of such a thing? Ogadima looked in confusion at the zinc where her hands were immersed in soapy dishwater. Zarachi was surprised, seeing her normally confident and bold sister look dejected. She moved to her, removed her hands from the soapy water, rinsed them and wiped them with a napkin, and led her to sit on one of the chairs at the kitchen island. Why would you think God is hindering you from getting a job? Zarachi asked again. Ogadima shrugged. Well, I was reading the Bible the other day. Zarachi smiled at this statement. Somehow, it was the story of Balaam, his donkey and the angel. Some words from the scriptures hit me like a sledgehammer. Something like, I've come here to oppose you because your path is a reckless one before me. That one was like a hot iron, piercing straight into my heart. Looking at her sister with something akin to fear, she continued, can God purposely block people's way? And why? Zarachi picked Ogadima's hands and put them in between us, gently rubbing them. Yes, Balaam replied that he would go back if the angel was displeased, and I got a feeling that I was to go back to honors. Ogadima continued before Zarachi could talk. It's okay, Dima. It's okay, Zarachi said as she tried to calm her sister down. They were both silent for a while before Zarachi started speaking. God is sovereign. That means he does as he pleases, but much more than that. We have a God who loves us enough to ensure, especially if you are his child, that we don't miss our steps in life. So yes, if he sees us going the wrong way, like a parent would, God will and can use anything to stop us from going the wrong way. Zarachi paused, got up and got a cup of water for her sister to drink. If God's word spoke to you like that, it means it was specifically meant to address an issue in your life. God's word has been described as fire, water, bread, lamp, and other different emblems in the Bible. If it hits you like fire, then it's to consume something or purify you. God says somewhere in the book of Jeremiah that his word is like fire and the people are like woods that the words will consume. So I think you should take time to pray more about this, Zarachi added. Ogadima nodded as she stared into space while nursing her half cup of water. What do you think of marriage? She whispered. Zarachi, who had stood up to check what she had on the gas burner, turned back and quickly walked over to her sister, who was looking at her with her soul in her eyes. Only both of them fully understood the import of that question. They had experienced pains from having an absent father who had never bothered about how they fared. Marriage is great with the right partner, Zarachi whispered with contentment. I have never regretted agreeing to marry Afam. Yes, we have our moments when we get on each other's nerves, just like we do at times as siblings, you and her and Zoma. But I'm glad I broke our path of never getting married, she added sheepishly. Ogadima nodded before sipping some more water again. Ogadima, Zarachi touched her shoulder. If you love him, marry him. Love Kwa. I don't love him, oh. I respect him a lot, but I absolutely love the twins. I can't imagine never getting to see them. Until God said if he marries someone else, I might never have access to Daniel and Deborah again, she said. Her voice trembled badly. Zarachi pulled her out from her seat. She hugged her little sister as much as her baby bump could accommodate. Respect is a good place to start from, if you are sure of the other person's commitments, she whispered to her ears. Ogadima pulled back and looked at her sister. Mr. Nwachukwu promised me a percentage of his company shares if I agreed. He said he wanted me to know that he's committed to the marriage. Wow! Zarachi pulled back. Wow, that's huge. He must be very serious about you if he's willing to give out a percentage of his company to you. Ogadima looked uncertain. Relax, Dima. We'll keep praying and trusting God. But I can assure you that marriage isn't evil. If you have peace about this, please go ahead. Jesus is the Prince of Peace. He says his peace he lives with us. Anything that doesn't give you peace isn't of God. Ogadinma looked at her elder sister with new eyes of awe and respect. How come you know the Bible more than me? She asked. Well, reading the Bible and allowing the Holy Spirit to teach and reveal the truth in the Bible isn't the same thing. So, you read the Bible because you love reading. I study the Bible because I want to know more about God. Zarachi replied with a gentle smile. Are you sleeping over? She asked Ogadinma. Yes, I think I will. It's getting late. Moreover, Uzoma is back, so Mama won't be lonely, Ogadinma replied.